Folks, today I'm going to take you through a home building site in Florida so you can see just how crazy this Florida housing market downturn is getting. These builders continue to build homes in Florida as home prices are collapsing. This has the potential to be as bad as 2008, 2009 if these trends continue. Because right now I'm in a Lennar home building community, and you can see there's just dozens and dozens of homes that are about to be completed, and these builders are doing big price cuts. There's some houses here in this community that are as cheap now as $250,000. And it's amazing how these builders just keep building into this downturn, because across the state of Florida, home values are now down 3.5% over the last year. But here in this area where I am, in Manatee County, they're down by 6% in the last year. And they're just gonna keep dropping, folks, these home prices in Florida. A lot of people think this is some type of mini correction that's just going to solve itself in a couple months or a couple quarters. No, that's not what's happening. You could see here these builders, they're just going to deliver even more homes, even more supply into this downturn, which is going to push prices down even more. And this is a mistake I see a lot of people in Florida say. I see it in the comment sections to my videos. They say, Nick, there's no downturn. I see the builders building everywhere. That means there's a boom. That was true a couple years ago, everyone, when a lot of people were moving to Florida. But now the inbound migration to Florida has dropped by 80%. So there's 80% fewer people moving to Florida today in 2025 compared to 3 years ago at the peak of the pandemic. And so when you see these builders building now, all it's gonna mean is it's just even more unsold homes on the market, even more inventory on the market to push prices down into the future. And of course, one of the main reasons why people have stopped moving to Florida is because it became too expensive. The prices boomed about 50 or 60% over 3 years during the pandemic. And so now what you're seeing is these brand new homes from these builders, as cheap as $250,000 on the townhome. Some of these homes over there that are separated, detached, are more like $360,000, $370,000. These builders are now competing with the resellers who already own their homes in Florida. So say you moved down to Florida a couple years ago, right? And you bought your home from a builder, you bought your home from another seller in 2021, 2022. Well, now when you go to sell your home, is maybe you were called back to New York, maybe you work for JP Morgan, you're moving back into the office, maybe you just want to go back to friends and family in the Midwest. When you go to sell your home, you're now competing against these builders who are just cutting prices left and right. And not too far from here, folks, there's a listing that I found that the owner bought for $315,000 in 2022, 2023. They now have it on the market for $265,000. So what is that? That's around a $45,000, $50,000 loss on a home that was purchased for $315,000. I mean, this downturn in Florida, it's getting real. Sellers are starting to lose a lot of money. And I think a lot of people now in Florida do know that the downturn is happening. They know that prices are starting to drop, but they don't understand just how much they could drop into the future and just how severe some of the underlying metrics look. I mean, right now, there's 182,000 homes for sale in the state of Florida. I want you all to think about that. 182,000 homes on the resale market only, not even including the builders. 182,000 on the resale market. That's the highest level of supply in at least a decade on the resale market. And it's almost 50% more supply than the entire state of Texas. So Texas is the state with the second most inventory. Texas has 120,000 homes. Florida has 180,000 homes with a significantly smaller population. And so that just puts into perspective how severe this downturn in Florida is getting, how much excess supply is on the market. And when you as a buyer or investor see that excess supply, it's telling you that prices are going to continue to drop. And folks, just look at this. Look at all these homes. Actually, all these homes, these are attached to each other. I don't know how I would feel about buying one of these attached larger homes. I mean, these are larger homes here that are attached. Like you share a wall with your neighbor. I'm not sure who's buying a floor plan like this, everyone. You guys can let me know whether you would buy, this is more a traditional townhome here, or a bigger home that's still attached to your neighbor. I mean, I think these builders are trying to save some money. Maybe they're trying to, save on some costs by attaching these homes. Probably the foundation cost is lower. You don't need to have as much land per lot land per house. But it is just crazy how much construction there still is in the state of Florida. Now here's the upshot to all this, everyone. Here's the good news that I'm going to deliver to you right now about what's going to happen in Florida in Florida's housing market and home prices over the next couple of years, they're going to get cheaper. They're going to continue to get cheaper. We at Reventure App, we're forecasting a statewide price decline of about 5.5% over the next 12 months. But in certain areas of Florida, like on the West Coast, we think the price declines could get as big as 8 to 9, maybe even 10% over the next year. And that's a big deal, everyone. A 10% decline in 1 year is really, really big. In the last downturn, prices in Florida dropped about 10% a year for 5 years. That's how they got to a 50% crash. So when you see potentially a 10% drop coming in your area in 12 months, that's huge. That is really, really big. And the good news is, I think we're going to start restoring affordability to Florida's housing market. Because the great thing about Florida prior to the pandemic is that it was a really affordable place to live. I mean, you could buy a house in Florida and you could make 35, 40 grand a year in 2019 and you could afford a house. I mean, I want you all to think about that. The typical mortgage payment on a house in Florida in 2019 was $1,000 a month, including taxes and insurance. Now it's around $2,500 a month. So the cost of owning a house in Florida in terms of your payments has gone up 150% since the pandemic. Of course, the incomes have not gone up 150%. The median income in Florida is still around 70 grand. So just many of the locals here can't afford the houses. And that's the ultimate problem, right? When the locals can't afford the houses, when they can't even qualify for a mortgage, you're just gonna have all this inventory sitting because the migration's dropped. The migration's down 80%. In 2024, we had the 5th worst year for Florida migration on record. You know, people don't want to pay these high costs. People can't afford it. You know, the hurricanes came through, scared some people away as well. Other people are getting called back into the office. You know, there's all these forces now that are pulling people away from Florida back to the Northeast, back to the Midwest. And it's resulting in cheaper prices in Florida. The question is just how much cheaper are they gonna get? And at the end of this video, I'm gonna tell you how much I think prices are gonna drop in totality in Florida's housing market, not just over the next year. Now you can see we have even more empty townhomes. These were recently completed. You can see no cars in the driveway. Empty, empty, empty. That looks like a construction truck right there. And finally, we have a couple cars over there. So finally, we have someone who actually might have bought one of these. And folks, I don't know if you can see that in the distance over there, but there's even more new construction behind the hill over there. There's multifamily apartments going up over there. They're clearing land over there for something else. You know, it's amazing how the builders just keep going. You know, the builders in their earnings reports, they're all pretty clear that Florida is the weakest housing market. CEO of KB Homes recently came out and said that. CEO of DR Horton's come out and said that Florida is their weakest market. But they're continuing to build because if you're a builder, especially a big builder, you know, what you care about is not only maximizing your profit margin, but you also care about maximizing your penetration into the market. And so some of these builders are just going to keep building so they can keep market share, even if their margins keep going down further. Lennar actually reported their worst first quarter profit margin in a decade to begin 2025. But as you can see here, this is a Lennar community. They're still building and they're cutting prices. They're giving mortgage rate buy downs. You know, you can get 5% mortgage rates when the market rate is 7%. Finally, here we're getting to a part of the community where some people actually live. You guys can let me know, would you ever buy in a builder community like this? You know, me personally, I'm probably not buying in a community like this because I say to myself, what are you buying when you buy in a community like this? You're buying a structure, you're buying a wooden frame box, basically, your house, and the land under that house is really not worth anything because there's no supply constraints. The builder just over there can just build even more homes, exactly your same floor plan, and can cut the price further. So when land is this plentiful out here in Parrish, Florida, and many other parts of the US like Texas and Arizona and Tennessee, when land is plentiful and the builders just keep building, the value of your lot when you buy in a builder community is just can actually keep going down. And again, this is like the big misnomer I see so often is that people seem to think when you see home building that that's a sign that your area is going up in value. No. In this part of the cycle, it's a sign that your area is going down in value. Very important you all understand that. If you see a lot of home building going on in your part of Florida, that's a signal that there's excess supply on the market, Builders are cutting prices. They're giving mortgage rate buy downs. They're forcing the resellers on the market, the people who already bought, to have to cut their prices further. And so I just want you all to remember that very clearly, is that the builders are an indication of declining values over the next year or two, not appreciating values. And just to update you all on how much values are actually going down in Florida. So as I said earlier, 3.6% year over year drop, according to Zillow's seasonally adjusted home value index across the state. Now, the biggest declines are where I am here on the West Coast. Manatee County is down around 6%. This is where Parrish is, where I am right now. Bradenton, Palmetto, that's all Manatee County. Prices down 6%. Sarasota County, prices down 8.4% year over year. That's a big drop for 1 year. Charlotte County, where Punta Gorda is, prices down 9.5% over the last year. Collier County, Naples, prices down 6.5%. I know a lot of people thought like Naples wasn't gonna get hit. Naples is getting hit. Prices are dropping in Naples. Up in Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, prices are down 5.9%. If we go out to Hillsborough County and Tampa, prices are down 3.1%. And now these value declines are even spreading to Central Florida, Lakeland, Orlando, Osceola County, values are dropping, and values are also dropping in South Florida. So in Palm Beach County, values are down over 3% in the last year. Palm Beach, that's a market I know a lot of you guys were looking in. Prices in Palm Beach are going down. Prices are also going down in Broward, and they are about to be down in Miami-Dade year over year. Miami-Dade is still up 0.7% year over year. However, it's declining month over month pretty heavily. It dropped around 0.5% last month, which annualizes to 6% in a year if it continues. So Miami is also now going down. Now this is interesting, everyone. Looks like someone bought one of these homes and turned it into a rental. This is the rare investor that is still buying in Florida. I'm gonna guess, how much is the rent for this house, do you think? Built maybe 2024. New build, looks probably like a 3x3, 3x2.5, 1650. I'm gonna say the rent on this is $2,100 a month. I'm gonna say the cost to buy this house would be more like $2,400, $2,500 a month. At the end of this video, we're gonna check and see if my guess was right. You guys can let me know how much you think this house would rent for. But in terms of brass tacks, you know, what you guys care about if you're a prospective buyer, how much are values going to drop in Florida in totality in this downturn? You know, we already know they're down 3.6% in the last year. They're down about 4.5% from peak. We think at ReVenture they're gonna go down 5.5% over the next 12 months. So if that happens, it would bring it down to 10% from peak. You know, overall, I think it's realistic to expect a 20% price correction from here on out in Florida. You know, the values are still about 18%, 19% overvalued. A 20% price correction just to get it back to normal. Just to get the market back to a level that's kind of within the long-term average. Of course, the market could correct below normal, right? That's what happened in the last downturn. Florida's housing market actually became very undervalued from 2009 to 2018. It was a deal to buy a house in Florida. You could see rarely is Florida, you know, fairly valued. Historically, it's either overvalued, undervalued, overvalued, or potentially going to be undervalued again. And the markets that could go down the most are the ones that are most overvalued. So an important point to consider if you're a prospective buyer in Florida is how overvalued prices are in your city and zip code. Because there's some big differences. There's certain parts of Florida's market right now which are only 10% overvalued. Like Sarasota has already had a pretty big correction. It's less overvalued than the state overall, whereas Palm Beach is very overvalued. So you're gonna wanna make sure you research the overvaluation rate for your county, your zip code in Florida. Because if you head back over there where I was filming before, the builder is selling a 4x3 home for $346,000 that's bigger than that house. So you could buy a home bigger than that house, newer than that house for $346,000, and your monthly payment would be about the same as the $2,600 a month in rent. And so this is just a great example of how the investors and the builders are just actually competing against each other, driving down the values, driving down the rents. However, clearly they need to go down by more to bring the demand back into the market. $2,600 a month in rent out here in Parrish, that's ridiculous. Don't be surprised if that ends up renting for $2,000 a month, or houses like that end up renting for $2,000 a month. But really, to understand how much values could really drop in your area in Florida, everyone, I would encourage you to check out the overvaluation rate for your zip code and county. There's some areas in Florida that are as much as 50% overvalued. You got to be careful buying in those areas. Go to www.reventure.app, create an account, and check out that overvaluation rate. It's available for $39 a month under a premium plan. Is it a good investment? This overvaluation rate on Reventure app is going to help you do it. So go to www.reventure.app right now, type in your city in Florida, and check out that overvaluation rate under a premium plan.